My name is Elizabeth Pruch, and I am thrilled to have you all with us today for Virtual Voices, where we're going to be focusing on voting, a very, very timely topic. Virtual Voices, as many of you know, was created as a way to ensure we're keeping our alumni engaged during these virtual times. We've had some amazing conversations. You can find videos and blogs about all of them on our website. Again, today we're talking about voting. We're thrilled to have this. I want to give a few reminders for the virtual setting here that I'm sure we all know at this point, but we hope that you all stay on mute. We are going to be managing Q&A via the chat feature. So if you have a question at any time, please throw it in the chat feature and I'll either call on you to ask it live or I'm happy to ask it on your behalf. We recommend speaker view just so we know who's speaking, but I always love to see the different names and people that are on these calls. It's one of the, I think the benefits of Virtual Voices is it's more casual and gives you that opportunity to see who else is engaging in these topics. And I would like to encourage everybody, as I'm going through these reminders and our next steps, is to throw in that chat feature. Why are you here today? Why did you care to come to learn about voting and talk about voting? We just want to get a sense of that. So open up your chat feature if you can and let us know what those are. Next up, I would love to just thank our sponsors. We simply could not be here without them. We have amazing support from many community sponsors, but Molson Coors Beverage Company, Southwest Airlines, and TIAA really understand the value of our alumni network. They support us in many different ways, and they have been for years, and we certainly appreciate them for all they're doing for the Leadership Foundation and this alumni network. So thank you to our sponsors. Okay, now I get the pleasure of introducing our speakers. We are truly privileged and honored to have these two here with us today. A couple of homegrown heroes, I like to call them, that are doing big work locally and nationally. First, I'd like to introduce you to Paul Lopez. As our elected clerk and recorder for his hometown of Denver, Paul is passionate advocate for empowering all Denverites to engage in the civic process. Prior to serving as the third ever elected clerk and recorder for the City and County of Denver, Paul served as the youngest elected city council member for 3 terms, representing his home District 3 in Denver's West Side neighborhoods. If you ask him, his proudest moments almost always happen as he empowers his dedicated staff and community leaders to lead. And he just shared that a lot of his staff have been there for 30 years. So he's got quite a bit of knowledge right there in his office, and we're thrilled to have him leading here in Denver. So Paul, thank you for being with us. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Amber, yes, thank you, Paul. Amber is, wow, she's doing so much. Amber is one of the country's leading experts on election administration and policy. She's CEO for the National Vote at Home Institute and Coalition and co-author of the book, When Women Vote. During her time as the former director of elections for Denver, Colorado, she transformed the elections division into a national and international award-winning office by designing pro-voter policies, voter-centric processes, and implementing technical innovations. Amber serves on the National Election Task Force on Election Crises, is an advisory board member for the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Election and Data Science Lab, and so much more. And we are very proud to call Amber a Leadership Denver alumni as well. So thank you, Amber, for being here. We appreciate you both spending so much time with us. Amber, I'm gonna start with you, and I'm so appreciating all the chats that you guys are throwing in there. Let's keep that up about why you're here. And again, if you have questions at any point, please throw it in the chat feature and we will get to those. I'm gonna start first though, Amber, if you could just expand and tell us why you believe voting from home is so important and why you do this work.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thanks for everyone that's joining today. It's great to be here and great to be here with a good friend in Clerk Lopez. I've known Clerk Lopez for a long time, and was really happy when he was elected to the position, because I know how much he cares about the voters of Denver. So, you know, the way that I look at the voting process, first and foremost, is that voters need to be first in the process. And what we've seen over time, whether it be the lack of access that women had prior to the 19th Amendment, the voting rights struggles that we had in the 1950s, the other enfranchisement issues that have happened to voters of all different gender as well as racial inequities that have plagued our process. Ultimately, since the formation of our country, certain voters have been left out because of policies, barriers, challenges that they faced in terms of accessing the system. So I truly and fundamentally believe that voters have to be first and foremost, and everything we do from a policy perspective, from a service delivery perspective, from a litigation perspective, all of it has to be about how to enfranchise and put voters first. And when I got to Denver, it was way back in 2005, I was a staffer at the time, and Denver was significantly flawed from a governance perspective. There was a challenging election that happened in 2006 that created long lines, that people lost out their ability to vote in that election, and it was very bad. And so there were various changes put in place after that, and I was lucky enough to be in a position where I could help change that process. And what we also found, kind of simultaneous to all of that organizational structural change, was a significant interest in the voting population in Colorado wanting to vote by mail. So we kept seeing this huge increase. And that actually tracks with the increase in vote by mail usage that we've seen all over the country over the last 20 years. There's been quite a steady incline in terms of voters choosing this method of voting. So I believe it's about putting voters first, giving voters options and choice. And what's great about Colorado's model is that instead of you having to fill out extra paperwork or take extra steps to get a ballot at home, the ballot it's predictable. So it's going to come to you every election. If you want to vote in person, you can still do that. And now you can do it at multiple locations instead of the one government assigned location that you used to have on one day. And then we also modernized registration and automated all that process. So, you know, Colorado very much has automated the service of elections. You're automatically registered to vote. Your address gets up to date automatically. A ballot is mailed to you proactively. And if you still want to vote in person, you can drop off your mail ballot that was mailed, or you can go vote at any vote center. So we've literally made it accessible, available, and put voters first in the process. And that's continuing. You know, I left a little over 2 years ago now, but like that's continuing in Denver. It's continuing in Jeffco. Like the whole premise of putting voters first is continuing. And that's why Colorado is a standout amongst the rest of the country. And it's why I think it is such it is a model that benefits the voting public at large. And it's frankly also why we've seen states like California and Hawaii and Nevada, and you know, we've more than doubled the number of states that have this model just in the last 9 months. So we're working hard to do that, and we know what the benefits are from a data perspective, but we also know what they are personally to voters that want to vote in the process.
That's fantastic. We're just so glad that you started that here in Colorado, and we're glad that you're still here and sharing that with the rest of the world.
I can't go be a voter somewhere else. I've got to remain a Clerk Lopez voter in Denver.
I'm sure you appreciate that. All right, we'll dive deeper into that in a second. Paul, I want to move to you though first and talk a little bit about equity in voting. And I'd love for you to talk about, you know, is our current model here working for everyone, and how is your office addressing this if the answer is yes or no?
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate that. Thank you, and thank you, Amber. I'm glad that you're still one of the Mile High City voters, one of the 513,000 registered voters. For the first time in our history here in Denver, we've eclipsed the 500,000 mark. So that's making a lot of progress. And so, you know, Amber, a lot of that, you know, your work, you know, a lot of folks who are in the right places, especially with the political will to have those policies in place to allow us to be able to continue to innovate, continue to address access. So equity. Right? You want to make sure that folks have access to the ballot. And what does that look like? Right? And one of the things that we did right away was look at turnout, and look at turnout not necessarily in a popular presidential election where you do have some folks that only vote in presidential elections. They're almost like migrating birds, right? They come and go depending on who's on the ballot and depending on the election. But we also looked at areas that you have eligibility for registration, but no registration, right? So you folks are eligible, but they're unregistered. So the participation is typically low in some of these areas. And you want to look at making sure you're expanding that access. First thing that we did is we increased the number of drop boxes, right? Drop boxes don't require staff until they're being emptied out, right, by our own folks. but they are open 24/7 with a model like this. You want to make sure folks have access to that, that they know where it's at, that they trust the process. And so one of the things that we did is kind of analyze Denver's turnout and where these pockets around Denver exist, and start addressing some of those issues. And first thing is asking why. Why is there a lack of participation from this area? Why is there a lack of registration in this area? Is it geographic isolation? Are there language and cultural barriers? Are there physical barriers? So it's addressing a lot of those, right? And kind of building that into our work. And I did this last time, and I don't know if it's going to show up, but that's your turnout during a municipal election where we really don't have the kind of participation that you do. And you kind of start looking at that inverted L that exists in the city, right? You guys have talked about that before. And you really look at making sure that we have that opportunity. We can't expect everybody to get on Twitter or to be connected to social media. Remember that the information superhighway is still an issue, especially in areas where folks have access to internet still, right? So you want to make sure that we're going to voters and engaging voters. So we created this outreach and engagement program where we have 5 individuals that are dedicated to that. I just got done speaking over at the Gathering Place, which is a shelter and a place, not shelter, but a place that has services for homeless women, right? And folks that, when you say vote at home, home to them may be that shelter. Home to them may be a park. Home to them may be a street corner. And so you want to make sure that folks still continue to feel empowered by this. So what we're doing is making sure that we are going out there, working with individuals who are not registered to vote, getting them registered, getting them familiar with the process, but also making sure that we're expanding those services. And so it's super important. The other thing I wanted to talk about is empowerment and a definition of empowerment. We have a lot, and this is what kind of guides this principle in terms of creating equity in the city when it comes to the democratic process. There's a definition of empowerment that inherently says, well, we want to empower, we want to give somebody the power to do something. And that's what we've kind of, that school of thought on empowerment has been there for a long time. But there's another school of thought. Empowerment isn't necessarily giving somebody power that doesn't have power. It is removing barriers for them to be able to exercise that power. In this case, it's the democratic process and the right to vote. So what are those barriers? And this team is dedicated and focused on examining what are those barriers, how can we remove them?
I love that. I think that the common thread between both of you are saying is that we've got to put our voters first, because that's what's important. So I want to open this up to have a question for both of you to just kind of expand on what you've already talked about, but what efforts are each of you making in your respective focuses on voting and educating our communities about voting? There's a lot of different ways of educating about voting. Some might need to know where to go to vote. Some might need to just know how to vote. So if you could talk a little bit about that, educating the community. Paul, we can start with you, and then Amber, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
I mean, first and foremost, we have such a great model, and it's so easy to vote, and we have to really just relay that, right? It doesn't happen automatically. There's a level of voter education that you have to go out there and do, and you have to meet voters where they're at. And it's become completely challenging in the pandemic because a lot of this, you normally do in person, and now you're forced to do it virtual. The biggest thing that we are combating in 2020 for the presidential election and also even for the state primary is misinformation. There's been a lot of misinformation about vote by mail, by drop boxes and the process. And, so one of the things that we're doing is really making it clear that this model is safe, that when you receive your ballot, which you all are going to start getting, we're going to mail them out October 9th, and they're going to start hitting mailboxes pretty soon. So make sure you sign that ballot and just drop it in a box or pop it in the mail. Don't wait forever, right? These aren't elves that are shipped in overnight to do the processing work, right? These are human beings. These are your neighbors and friends and your family that are out there doing this work. The biggest thing that we can do is convey a sense of trust, of confidence that that this is a safe model, it's secure, and it's completely transparent. And as soon as you relay that and create that trusted, that sense of trust, I think you have people's participation. So one of the things that we're doing is making sure that we are tapping into every single community. East Denver, South Denver, we had a town hall with the Vietnamese speaking community for the first time in forever, and it caught fire. This thing had so many different participants, and it's starting to spread out. We were out in East Denver the other day, just kind of running through the model and the process with folks from refugee communities, right? From Somali, Bantu, Burmese, folks from India, folks from East Timor. Those kind of places where folks have not been invited to participate in a democracy, and are very distrustful when somebody from the government shows up at their door. And you kind of got to get past those obstacles and relay this sense of trust and make it easy for folks and kind of walk people through that process. And we do it in multiple languages. A person can request a ballot in 5 different languages. We have services that are available for folks that need that extra help. Our ballot is bilingual in Spanish and English, and we are doing everything possible to make sure that there are no barriers for folks to be able to vote.
Love it. Thank you, Paul. Amber, what are you doing on your end to educate our communities?
Yeah, well,
nationally?
yeah. So first I would say, Denver has strategically and for a while, and now even more so, invested in voter education. That's actually not the case in most parts of the country. Most local jurisdictions don't have budgets for that. So there was actually a recent analysis done, and there's over 9,000 different local entities, cities and counties that run elections in the country. And 90% of them have 5 or fewer full-time staff members. And most of those, because there's so few, most of them are not communications folks. Often it's the elections director or somebody else in the office that's trying to do communications. And they do not invest, because they're often cut off from a budgetary perspective from investing in voter education and outreach. So this started to happen in 2016 with some of the cyber threats and some of the misinformation that started in that election, and now it's gotten even worse over the last 4 years with online mis and disinformation. And it's hard for these local entities that are the trusted sources of information to fend off all of that effort. So recognizing those giant gaps, our organization actually created a communications toolkit early this year. We've made it available for free to every single local election office in the country. It's an out-of-the-box communications toolkit that's got messaging, and they can brand it themselves and add their own branding on it. But it literally provides them like social media posts, out-of-the-box like verbiage for newsletters and just different things like that. And we're continuing to add to that. We added a Spanish version. We're adding ballot life cycle videos and just education generally about the process to arm local election officials with an ability to fend off the attacks that they're getting daily. I will say that, before this year, voting by mail as an option to vote was never a partisan problem. Colorado, yes, there were some Republicans that didn't like it when we first did it, but then they kind of came around and now they like it. That is not the case in other parts of the country. And frankly, this year we've worked with states that are both red and blue. And until tweets started right around late spring of this year, until a lot of the tweets started about attacking this model, it was a bipartisan supported model and method. We've worked with states like Utah and Nebraska and North Dakota and lots of different red states that, by the way, have been expanding vote by mail for a long period of time. So it was very peculiar to see a lot of that start happening, because it doesn't really track with the bipartisan support that exists in states. So I think it's another example of we all have to kind of try to ignore what Washington, D.C. might be doing at one point in time, because it might not mesh with what the rest of the country how the rest of the country sees things. And that's just an example, but that's kind of how our organization is supporting election officials directly. We've got a whole series of videos coming out soon, interviews with local election officials talking about the process in their various states. So we've got that whole collection that's going to come out. And it does vary by state. So it's really important that you rely on your trusted source in your state, whether that be the local or the state officials, for information about how to vote in your state.
That's good. I think that's certainly something that we can all do is continue to educate others. The more we know, and that's what a lot of you said, even in the audience on the chat features, you're here because you want to learn more. So this is exactly what we should be doing, right? And continue to pass that on. I want to go a little bit more into, you know, a lot of the concerns about voter fraud. It's what we just kind of touched on the surface. And we actually had several questions come through during registration, just asking you guys to just kind of address the claims by President Trump specifically about voter fraud and the concerns about this. You know, it's what's everywhere. They're tweeting about it, right, Paul and Amber? They're tweeting about it. So help us understand a little bit more about some of these widespread concerns of voter fraud and what we might be doing to address some of that. Amber, let's start with you since you were speaking, and then we'll move on to you, Paul.
Sure. Well, so first and foremost, voter fraud, widespread voter fraud is exceedingly rare. And we know that from various organizations, including the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative-based think tank that has tracked these issues for 20 years. The instances of fraud as it relates to vote by mail is 0.0006% of all ballots cast. I also will differentiate between voter fraud, meaning the voter is trying to do something wrong or trying to cast a ballot that they're not eligible to cast, and election fraud. And the much more prevalent issue is election fraud. And what that means is that is when political operatives, and we have a great example in North Carolina in 2018 that happened. There's been other examples of this where political operatives, and in that instance, it was political operatives knocking on the door of North Carolina voters, asking them to go drop their ballot off for them. And they were disposing of the ballots that they knew were not from their party. That group of individuals is deliberately tried to interfere and destroy the voting rights of those individuals that they impacted, and they were held accountable. So what's really important in all of this is that we have systems where we can deter, detect, and then hold a bad actor accountable in the event that they try to do something. And that's not only with regards to this issue, but that's cyber security, that's mis and disinformation, it's identifying those bad actors that are trying to hurt the system. And sometimes those bad actors are elected officials saying the wrong things or hurting the voting process or spreading misinformation about the voting process. So we have to have systems that are able to deter and detect and then hold those accountable. And we have a lot of examples of that where voter fraud or election fraud have been prevented in systems like Colorado. There's actually a great story out of Weld County in the 2016 election where the former GOP chairman, state party chairman of Colorado Republicans was convicted of voter fraud because he tried to turn in his ex-wife's ballot and they caught it, right? So part of the reason also that that the percentage of convictions is so low is because it's caught in the process of deterring and detecting. And the final thing I would say is it's our voting process, it's our democracy. Of course, everyone needs to be committed to ensuring that voters are protected and that they're not only protected from bad actors or operatives that are trying to hurt the voting process, but they're protected from anybody who's trying to impact their ability to vote in any way. And so I look at it in very much that way. And I think the North Carolina example, North Carolina at the time when that happened, they had very limited options. They had no Dropbox options. They didn't offer prepaid postage. They required 2 witnesses to sign each envelope. Literally, a voter had to find 2 people to witness their signature while they were signing it. And so all of the individual limits that North Carolina put on the voter themselves actually exposed the voter to nefarious bad actors that took advantage of those very limited opportunities that voters had and show up and say, oh, I'll drive your ballot 45 minutes to the clerk's office for you. Let me help you. And voters were taken advantage of because they were limited. So it's a great example of what happens when you limit individual opportunity in the voting process. It can expose voters to very bad circumstances.
That's interesting. Paul, talk to us about voter fraud.
Like Amber said, there really is, there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud. And the small percentage of folks that we catch, and I'm talking as a country, are prosecuted. You know, if there's anything suspicious on our end, we turn that over to the DA. However, just for folks to ease their minds about, about the security of your ballot. There's a lot of things in place to make sure that we ensure that your vote is counted and that your vote, so one person gets one vote. So right off of the bat, your mail-in ballot is a piece of paper. It's not something that can get erased on a thumb drive. All of our ballots, all of our votes, whether they be, a mail-in ballot or going in person or an accessible ballot that folks use on a tablet, produce a paper ballot. And we hang on to those for a long time. The other thing is our teams, our election workers, we call them election judges here across the country, they're called poll workers. They work in a bipartisan fashion. We have Republicans and Democrats and even unaffiliated and some independents that are working, making sure that the whole process from start to finish is bipartisan. We maintain custody of all of our equipment from our red boxes. They're tamper-proof, and it is only our paid election officials that are handling any elections materials, not materials in terms of brochures, but our boxes that are manning our vote centers, that are emptying out drop boxes, that are processing throughout the system. The other thing that's important for folks to know is that there's nothing in here that's connected to the outside internet. Nothing. You can't get in and say, oh, we're going to change it. You can't bust a Ferris Bueller and change your grades all of a sudden, right? Some of you guys understand that, you Gen Xers like us?
I'm with you.
Okay, good. Cultural references, right?
Yeah.
So you can't go and do that. The other thing is that we verify signatures. Every single signature is verified by a bipartisan team. They are trained by FBI specialists. The other day I was sitting in one of the trainings, and it's actually pretty legit, right? It's super interesting to be able to see. And a lot of them are folks who have been doing this for quite a while. And so there's those refreshers. We make sure that only folks who have badged access, that our staff, have access to those rooms, election judges. We also maintain transparency. So there are some poll watchers that go through the process of becoming a poll watcher. Not everybody can just walk in and say, I'm watching the polls, right? We maintain access, we maintain a process for folks to be able to do that so that there is transparency. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, we're not going to have a whole bunch of folks in our lobby watching the process, but we are going to have 24/7, we're going to have feeds of the process throughout the system that you're going to be able to see online. All of our boxes are monitored by cameras 24/7. And the other thing that's important for folks to know is that we do tests before and after the election. We do what we call a logic and accuracy test, where we hand mark ballots, have folks, so we have a member of the Republican Party, a member of the Democratic Party come in, hand mark ballots, they vote their ballots as they see fit. These are test ballots. We compare those to folks who do the same number of ballots, they mark the same number of votes on an accessible tablet for folks who are either, who are visually impaired or hearing impaired. And they are able to access that, use that, and then we scan all those and we compare the hand marked ballots to what's scanned and make sure that they match. So almost like a calibration beforehand, and then afterwards we do what's called a risk limiting audit, and we make
sure. Day already, huh?
Yeah, there you go. Oh, it's been a long. It's, what is it, April 336th today?
There you go. Yeah, we'll talk about that off season.
Yeah. So anyway, there's a lot of processes that take place to make sure that our system's secure and that your ballot absolutely will count. And there's actually something that I want to make sure that we're pushing out there, and we can definitely use some of your help in kind of spreading the word about this. So Ballot Trace is a tracking engine, and what it does is it allows you as the voter to be able to track your ballot through the system. It gives you updates through text messaging and email. My ballot just told me that it's on its way, getting ready to be mailed out. And it'll also let me know after I've returned it when it's in the mail. and when it returns to us, when it's received by us, and when it's counted. So
Wow.
it's a great system. You go to ballottrace.org and sign up, but make sure you're also registering to vote. You know, some folks take a while to do that. You should do that as soon as possible, and don't wait to vote. Study your ballot, yes. Study the issues, absolutely. But turn that ballot in when you can. The sooner the better. You can just put a stamp on it, pop it in the mail, or put it in one of our secure drop boxes, and then we handle it from there. Again, safe.
Really helpful, Paul. Yeah, no, that detail is helpful, and we're seeing it in the chat too, is just how helpful this kind of detailed information is to better understand what's happening. I want to shift the conversation to funding. Everything you just described, Paul, that costs money, right? That seems like a lot. And we know, Amber has told us too, that what we see here in Colorado is a really wonderful model that's modeling for other states in this country. So I'd like, Paul, for you to quickly talk about funding on a local perspective. And then Amber, I'd love for you to talk about kind of what that looks like on a national level and what the differences are state to state, maybe what's really needed. How do we go about getting the correct amount of funding to really have a safe process? So Paul, I'll start with you on the local level, please.
Funding is absolutely critical. Now, when you think of the city budget, and especially at a time like during COVID, you really have to think about the essential functions of government, right? We have to have a continuity of government. Our democracy cannot end because of a pandemic, especially now. Our model, however, by the way, is pandemic proof. You don't have to go in person to vote. You don't have to feel like you're risking your health to go vote. All you got to do is fill it out and put it in a box or drop it in the mail. However, the one thing that I really have to make sure that we put out there is not only is your ballot secure, but just the ease of access. The other thing that I was going to mention is the fact that we are an independently elected division. So the Office of the Clerk and Recorder in 2006 became independently elected. Although it existed in the past, it was only appointed by the mayor. So we were kind of beholden by that budget. And now, and these are some of the policies that Amber had spoke of in the past, like before, having the ability to make those decisions over your own budget, to call the shots on your budget, right? We are absolutely conscious of the budget cuts, and we did our part. There's furloughs in some cases. I'm taking furloughs. So we're doing our best to make sure that we're running a lean shop, but we're also making sure that we have the resources to be able to get the job done. And it takes it takes a little bit of a political backbone to be able to stand up and say, hey, wait a second. Democracy is a key government function, and we have to make sure that we have the funds to be able to do it. Initially, we had a little bit of a disagreement with the administration, with the mayor, because of the budget and the furlough schedule did not include input from the folks that are going to be running the elections. You can't just shut down the city when we're in the middle of an election. So we kind of, we worked that out. We were able to make that happen. At the end of the day, it is critical, and it is critical for state legislators, for the executive branch on the state level, for local government and county government, to make sure that there's a budget that is healthy, that is consistent, and that values the ability for us to be able to cast our ballot. If we did not have a healthy budget, it would impact our ability to actually run the election. And it makes me so sad, and it's frustrating to see other states have to go through that. And part of the nefarious activity that's out there is, people realize how much mail ballots have increased participation. So one of the things that they're doing on the other side of it is trying to defund it, right? And almost in a way that sabotages participation. So, and it's absolutely critical. And I'm so glad that, Amber brought up the federal funding. We had asked both our Senator Gardner and Senator Bennett to make sure to count on us as a resource, but also to fight for that funding, not just for Colorado, but for the rest of the country.
Well, it's helpful to hear. Amber, before I get to you, quick question in the chat feature. Paul, is the ballottrace.org, is that for just Denver voters, or is that?
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
I've been thinking very Denver centric, right? So I apologize for that. So it's Ballot Trace in Denver, it's Ballot Tracks in other counties. Now, the reason it's like that is because that originated in Denver, right, Amber?
10 years ago.
Yes.
Okay.
And so, and you know, we both, Amber and I probably have some good opinions about that history and what's come out of it, but it's a very important tool. But yes, you have ballot tracks in other counties the state is employing. And
Do me a favor, Paul, will you throw that in the chat feature just so we have it and identify which is for Denver, which is for others? That'd be great.
will do.
Thank you, sir. And Amber, I'd love to hear from you. I think it's really interesting to hear that local side, but you have a national look at what funding is, how important it is, and really how we relate to other states and what's needed. So if you could just expand, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, I think the first and foremost, elections are a core government service. So it's one of those things that is required for the government to deliver. And elections are also funded at the local level. So cities and counties ultimately pay the bill for elections across the country. There's a little bit of variance, but generally the states don't cover election costs. They don't cover even close to a percentage of their costs. So when you kind of hear a lot of like national media of like states need money, it's actually locals that need the money because they're the ones that pay the bills. They're the ones that process ballots, pay poll workers, process voter registrations, what have you. The state and the Secretary of State, they oversee regulations, they oversee certain policy considerations, but they don't conduct the nitty-gritty direct service to voters, right? So elections are funded at the local level. Well, with COVID, one of the things that has compounded an already very difficult situation is that local budgets are obviously reliant on sales tax revenue and things that happen there. So across the country, there's been this decrease in funding at the local level that's been attributable to COVID. And then you combine that with the fact that elections have always been underfunded. So the federal government has never contributed effectively to the conduct of elections, even though every 2 years it's a federal election because it's either Senate or Congress or president. And so the only time that Congress has adequately provided enough funding, but for the wrong things, was post Florida 2000. So we have this big catastrophe and their immediate reaction is we must never have butterfly ballots again. So they threw hundreds of millions of dollars to build voting equipment quickly and fast. That is all now shredded and not in use because it was 20 years ago. And we know technology has a shelf life of maybe a few years. So they threw all this money at technology to solve a problem. That actually did not help solve the problem of long lines, lack of funding, bad processes, voter confusion, barriers in the process. It didn't help with any of that. It just threw money at technology that didn't actually solve the fundamental core problems with our voting process. So you combine kind of this lack of funding overall, then you add COVID, where you now have underfunded election offices that are already trying to get by with very little. You heard me say the 90% have 5 or fewer full-time staff. You combine that with COVID, and now you have an even bigger problem. And so my organization and others, and I've been working on national funding since March on this, we advocated for $2 billion to go to 50 states and 10,000 local election offices. Congress gave $400 million. To put that in perspective, they gave $60 billion to the airline industry, and now they're going to give more. And when you compare what all of these different entities that are, by the way, not required under the Constitution in terms of access, when you compare the little tiny amount that election offices got, it's kind of unbelievable how badly Congress failed on this. And it's been exasperated now because in-person voting still has to happen, all of that. Now, Colorado is in a much better position than other states because Colorado already was planning to mail ballots to every voter. So they had that in their budget. A lot of other states were planning a different mechanism. Now they're trying to do cleaning, social distancing, add more equipment, get larger sites, all of that for that in-person voting structure that is massive, by the way, plus 40% or so trying to vote by mail. So they've kind of got a much bigger problem than, say, the vote by mail states do. And then the final thing I would say as well is that the model in Colorado, when we went and designed this way, we did quite a few things. And one of them, not only did we increase turnout, increase service delivery, increase access for voters, tear down some of the barriers that a lot of voters used to face, we saved money. And so in a Pew analysis done in 2014 after Colorado implemented this model, found a 40% reduction in administrative costs and an even bigger savings in capital equipment expenditures. So when you don't have all these polling places along with thousands of poll workers, you save money, right? So Denver reduced the workforce. So we used to need a lot more poll workers than what Denver now needs today. That reduction was about 70%. So that's costs that don't have to occur on people in the field. And then capital equipment was a big one. So when the state went to get a new voting system in 2015, about $20 million spent statewide, entire state. That would have been about 180 million had we not gone to this model. So other states have all of that extra overhead and costs that are not accounted for because of their voting models. So that's kind of the funding story. It's unbelievable to me that Congress has failed not only election officials, but by extension voters. So in such a ridiculous way this year on this issue.
You know, a lot of what you talk about, Amber, makes me interested in the infrastructure around voting from home. And I want to remind the audience too, if you have questions, please throw it in the chat feature. I can keep going, but we'd love to hear from you all as well. But Amber, I'm wondering if you can expand, and Paul, if there's any part of this that really resonates on a local level, I'd love to hear it. But talk to us, Amber, about kind of the infrastructure changes that and the shifts that would need to be made for states to move from their current voting process to a vote from home mail-in ballot process. I mean, you gave a little tidbit there, but I'd love to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, there's some key new programs, right, that come along with this type of model. One of them is drop boxes. So we know, and we've done a few studies and national polls on this, that voters prefer to drop their ballot off in person if that option is available to them. So they love to get their unvoted ballot mailed to them, but they really do like that in-person experience of dropping their mail ballot off directly to the elections officials. We also know that that is a more secure method and a faster method to get the ballots to election officials versus it traveling through the postal stream. Postal stream is a great option, but it does take more time, and voters, we know, like to do that. So installing drop boxes, expanding those options are really important. The other thing is you're printing and mailing ballots. So not every jurisdiction, a lot of jurisdictions have done this manually. So they literally, election judges stuff the ballots in envelopes and send them out. That is what Jefferson County and Kentucky is doing right now. And they have 90,000 ballots to do manually. They don't have a vendor to do it. They're doing it manually. And they've been impacted by COVID along with protests from the Breonna Taylor situation in Kentucky. So they had to shut down their office for 5 days and now they're behind, right? So that's a great example of funding sure could have helped them. Different process modifications sure could have helped them, but they're feeling the impacts of COVID and other things in a much different way than what they would have faced in previous years. So, you know, we're gonna, these are all issues that have been sitting there kind of under the radar, I guess is the best way to say it. And, you know, they're coming up and being exasperated in the pandemic when budgets and all of these things are very important, and election officials are having to adjust in a magnificent way that we never would have seen prior to 2020.
Yeah, and it makes me think, thank you, Amber. Paul, you mentioned just some of the changes you guys are making here locally to help alleviate some of the concerns that our community is having. One you mentioned before this call was you're moving all the mail-in ballots, the ballots that are mailing out to first-class mail. That's an infrastructure change you've chosen to make. What else have you been doing, or expand on that, and also adding the drop boxes? I know you've talked about that, but the infrastructure sounds like a really big piece of this.
It is. It is. And, you know, with unfortunately, you know, the misinformation coming from the White House, you know, the late night tweeting, the allegations of widespread fraud, and obviously they reek of just somebody who does not know the process and has not taken the time to understand the process. and how it's security. And a lot of it is just it's damaging rhetoric. And so, you know, you unfortunately, what we're seeing is an erosion of trust from voters who could definitely benefit from having a mail-in ballot and being able to vote. A lot of people are now, you know, kind of following this white rabbit down the hole that really doesn't exist. And so a lot of it is going to be catching up. It's an erosion of political will. Colorado, you know, the stars aligned in Colorado because you know, here we are able to have the privilege, right, of being able to just have universal mail-in ballots. We've been, you know, our voters have been doing this for 7 years. So there's a culture of participation that has grown on us over time to have that kind of trust. The other thing is that, you know, once those ballots start coming into our custody, we can start processing them, but we don't start tabulation or counting until November 3rd, right? That can't happen in some other states. They don't allow them to start processing them. And so, you know, as soon as you guys will see, you know, the last day to vote on November 3rd, 7 p.m., we'll start posting preliminary results. And that's because we have the ability to actually process and get to the point and scan, whereas other counties and other states can't do that. They're prohibited from doing that. So it really creates a backlog and just a train wreck in some states, right? But it all comes down to that political will. The other thing is being able to have uniform application across counties and states, right? We work with other clerks in Jefferson County, I mean, Lord, El Paso, Weld, Arapahoe, Adams, work in constant communication, counties up in the high country and on this model. And we kind of have it down to they're almost exact practices, right? And they're uniform. You can put a ballot in a box in Arapahoe County and it's going to come to Denver. And you can rest assured that that's going to be the case, right? So there has to be that kind of uniform application, but there has to be political will. And I think what's going on right now is you're seeing that erosion of political will. You're seeing representatives that are afraid of the results of an election, and they're willing to do everything to try to evade those results of the election, even sabotaging their own democratic process. So it's going to take, since sometimes in the chat, I saw it pop up, what can we do? You can be an advocate for that, right? And you can empower. Remember, I meant the definition of empowering, right? You can remove those barriers and you can advocate for that. And then hopefully what happens in this country is that you're going to start seeing people seeing the proof in the pudding, right? They're going to see states like Colorado and Washington and Hawaii run flawless elections. And those are mail ballot in states, right? And so I think it's critical. Uniform application, political will, and accountability, right? I know you mentioned something else. I hope I didn't ignore that.
Nope, that's perfect. I mean, I think what's in your head, we want to hear it. So I want to shift a bit, almost everything. Paul.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, I know. I saw the look on your face. Let's shift to, I want to just ask a simple question because I'd love both of your inputs on this. Paul, we'll start with you and then go to you, Amber. But why is early voting so important this year specifically above others? But why is early voting so important?
Well, one, because of the pandemic. You know, we've adjusted very well to it. We're following all CDC guidelines. You know, our election judges all have PPE. They're wiping things down. We got shields and protective barriers in between themselves and the public. But it also requires us to keep 6 feet apart from each other. And, you know, if you've ever been to a vote center, or if you've ever come down to kind of witness the whole process during an election, people are kind of crammed up in these rooms, right? I mean, you're literally working right next to somebody and you're processing ballots, you're sorting ballots, you're doing signature verification, and people are interacting. So we have to make sure that we are keeping physical distance. And that right there, combined with a 3-card ballot, does take some time. And it does take space. So what we've been able to do is adjust to that. We have McNichols building, which is going to be our central VSBC. We're utilizing the Pepsi Center, Exto Event Center. We have some backup locations in case, power outages and stuff like that. So we want to make sure that folks have that distance so that they don't feel like they're risking their health by doing their civic duty. So that's one of the most important things. Secondly, it's absolutely critical for folks to be able to count on Denver providing and valuing accuracy over speed. You want us to be accurate and take our time and be diligent. Like I said, you will get some results coming in, at 7:05. Every 90 minutes you start seeing that, but know that those results aren't official until 2 weeks later when we certify the ballot, right? And part of that is just making sure that we are maintaining that physical distance and repeating what we did in June with our state primary, which was folks, 99% of people did not come in person to vote. What was 50.2%, the highest turnout for a statewide primary. That's 1% of folks came in person, and nobody got sick. So that right there is indicative of the model and how it's pandemic proof and how it works. And so most of that is just getting folks to understand that when you vote early, you give us the chance to be able to process it. You give us the opportunity to be able to prepare it over time so that it maintains a continuity, so it runs smoothly, instead of going at the last second to vote and, kind of clogging the system up a little bit, creating a heck of a workload. This is going to be a very popular election. You're going to see high turnout, but the most important thing is it avoids crowds and it avoids lines, right? What the CDC is definitely recommending, whether you're in a restaurant or whether you're at some kind of function, the last thing you want is a bunch of people in a room with poor ventilation. Please fill that ballot out, study everything, drop it off, turn it in, track it with Ballot Trace or Ballot Tracks, and we take it from there. And rest assured that your ballot will be counted, that it's safe, and that it's secure, and it's 100% transparent.
Vote early for accuracy and for your own health. Amber, why should we vote early? Why is it so important?
Well, for all the reasons that Paul said, for sure. And then the one other that I would add, which I know people always kind of laugh when I say this, but when you do turn your ballot in and you take care of it early, the campaigns check you off their list. So they will stop calling you, stop texting you, stop emailing you, hopefully not knocking on your door anymore. I haven't figured out yet how to turn off the commercials, but I have talked to people about it. But when you take care of it, that actually does stop some of that. And then, once you take care of it, then you can kind of focus on encouraging others, maybe serving as a poll worker if you want to do that. But you can check it off the list and then move on and encourage the rest of the people and share with the world that you've already voted. Like, I can't wait to vote. This is going to be my earliest year voting because, I know it's so important and again, it's better for Paul's team. Like, I know the team, I hired many of them, and it's better for them. I know if they can process the ballots sooner in advance, and it doesn't put so much pressure and stress on election day only, which is where we see, frankly, all the problems. Like, all the headlines around elections usually come from election day, machine malfunctions, 5 and 6 hour lines, which we've seen in multiple states this year in the middle of a pandemic. So most of the headlines, most of the issues come when most of the people cast ballots, which has traditionally been on election day in most parts of the country, not here, but most parts of the country. And so whatever you can do to alleviate that pressure off of election day, the better it is for everybody.
100%.
I love, Amber, your reason to vote early, to get rid of the text messages and the calls, and you let me know how I can help with the commercial part of it.
I've talked to some of the Comcast people. I mean, I think it's just a matter of connecting bills with voter records. So.
Well, if anybody can do it, you can. I love it. Okay, I have one final question for the two of you as we start to wrap. You know, you've given a lot of advice, a lot of knowledge, a lot of tips. I think we recognize and we know we need to vote early. What one piece of advice, and it may be something you've already said, but one piece of advice or tip can you leave us with that this leadership community can do to help? Amber, I'll start with you and then go to you, Paul.
Well, first and foremost, I know you're all going to vote, so I don't have to say it for you to vote, but encourage everyone in your orbit to vote, your family, your friends. And I would also, one thing that I do every election cycle, I have a 7 and a 9-year-old, and every time my ballot comes, and this is one of the reasons I like to vote at home, is the ballot comes and we fill it out together. They ask me questions like, what does state representative do? And what does mayor do? And like, we have all these conversations throughout the process. So I know I'm creating lifelong civically engaged students of democracy that care about what's on the ballot and they understand how it translates into their everyday lives. So use it as a civics lesson for your kids if you're not already doing that, because I think it's a great way to get them started early. And then the second big thing is, you know, you've heard both Paul and I say misinformation and disinformation is the biggest problem in this election cycle. It also was the biggest problem 2 years ago and 4 years ago, and we don't have a good solution for it. But the way to push back, the way to make it better is to, number one, boost and support the local trusted voices that have the right information about voting. Boost what Denver Elections puts out on their website. Share that with your networks. Like, continue to share that message over and over. And if you see incorrect information about the voting process, if you see an ad, if you see other misinformation that's spreading around on social media, report it to the local election officials and also to the social media platforms. I won't say how many, but I am a regular reporter of bad tweets on Twitter that are misinforming the public about the election process. And so report it to the platforms, but also report it to your local election officials, because Paul's team can put out good information and respond to those things if they know about it. If they don't know about it, it's hard for them to act on it. So share, you know, make sure you're also, as a community, tracking that information and sharing it so that we can make sure voters have the right and the good info in front of them as they make their voting decisions.
Really helpful. Thank you. Paul, one piece of advice. I know we are at time, everyone. We'll wrap very quickly. Paul, please, what's your advice?
First of all, your ballots come in the 9th. Make sure you sign that ballot when you vote. Signing it is super important, and then pop it in the mail. You only need one stamp to do it. Trust the fact we've been working with USPS to make sure that this is going to be smooth. Also use those drop boxes. There's 38 of them around the city. Don't wait until the last minute to do it. Drop it off. You can go to denvervotes.org/voterinfo or go to your county's website, and you'll see that map. You'll see those locations. The advice for me is it's one thing for us to be able to see inequity. It's one thing for us to be able to call something out. It's so easy for us to be able to do that now. The question and the challenge that I have for you is, how are you going to move into action? How are you going to move others into action? A lot of folks feel helpless during the pandemic. They feel helpless when they see something like this. You have a responsibility, and it's super easy. Participate and empower others to participate. There are a lot of young people that wish they can vote, that are itching to vote, but they can't. Now, 17-year-olds who are going to be turning 18 by November 3rd are going to be able to, but there's so many of them, right? I have a teenage daughter that is clamoring to be able to vote. She's super engaged. There are folks who are new Americans that can't vote yet, and they have a voice. So there are a lot of ways that you can participate outside of the ballot box, by helping, by volunteering. If you were to get a sign that just says, go vote, and hold it on the street corner, that's going to impact, right? So identify those folks that may not have that access, that need that extra push. Get them to go vote, and make sure that folks who feel that because of a status issue or whatever that they can't vote doesn't mean that they cannot participate in this democracy. You can volunteer, you can do other things to help promote that. And at the end of the day, it's going to be a cultural shift and a tide that's going to kind of change that, hopefully for the better, to make sure folks understand that they have a role in this democracy.
It's wonderful parting advice, Paul. Participate. Let's all be a part of this. Let's vote. As we wrap up, I want to say thank you, Paul and Amber. We so appreciate you spending time with us during a very, very busy time of year for you. We will be thinking of you and the work you're doing. We will do our part. We certainly appreciate your time. We will send out a recap of this call with key takeaways to everybody who has registered, so please be on the lookout. And just 1 or 2 quick reminders as we close out. We do have another Virtual Voices coming up on October 29th about redlining. This is going to be a fantastic and very informative conversation with 3 folks that are working very closely about redlining. The map that Paul showed earlier is very similar to the maps we'll learn about with redlining. So please join us for that. Finally, we have Impact Denver applications are open until December 4th. We encourage you to recruit. You are our best recruiters. Who would be good for Impact Denver? Please let us know. We also have Impact Denver project proposals. This is where our Impact Denver teams will work with a nonprofit organization that needs help in a specific area. We would love to see your nonprofit or nonprofit boards that you're on to apply to be a part of this. Again, thank you so very much, Amber and Paul. We appreciate your time. We appreciate the extra 3 minutes from everyone, and we will see you at our next Virtual Voices. Thanks so much.